In early 1990s, Los Angeles police crackdowns and gang violence collided with the rise of a new West Coast superstar, Snoop Dogg. Within months of dropping the platinum-selling Doggy Style, his fame made him a lightning rod for both the LAPD and rivals on the street. But when a single gunshot in 1993 left a man dead and Snoop facing a murder charge, what happened next would flip the script on everything America thought it knew about hip-hop and justice. Headlines screamed, "Rapper charged with murder," but buried in police errors, media panic, and legal crossfire was a detail that few realized. The freedom of one of rap's icons would hinge on a chain of evidence that nearly broke. How did Snoop Dogg accidentally beat his murder charge, and what did it cost for him to walk free? By the summer of 1993, Los Angeles felt like it was on a razor's edge. The city was still haunted by the fires and fury of the '92 riots, with neighborhoods scarred and trust in the LAPD at an all-time low. Violent crime numbers climbed year after year. Over 1,000 homicides in 1992 alone, most tied to street gangs and turf wars. News anchors ran nightly tallies of shootings, while city leaders promised crackdowns that landed hardest in Black and Latino neighborhoods. Police helicopters circled above South Central and Long Beach, their spotlights sweeping over streets where kids grew up knowing the sound of gunshots better than the sound of silence. At the same time, a new soundtrack was rising from those same blocks. West Coast hip-hop, raw and unfiltered, started blasting from car stereos and corner stores. Rappers like Dr. Dre and his young protege, Snoop Doggy Dogg, turned stories from the street into platinum records. But every new hit seemed to draw more suspicion from City Hall and the press. Headlines warned of gangsta rap fueling violence, and politicians blamed lyrics for the city's chaos. Radio stations faced protests, and magazine covers splashed mugshots next to album sales. The message was clear. For every chart-topping single, there was a cloud of controversy waiting to rain down. The LAPD, already under fire for the Rodney King beating and the Rampart corruption scandal, doubled down on aggressive tactics. Task forces swept through neighborhoods, targeting anyone who fit the profile: baggy clothes, blue rags, or just the wrong address. For young black men, fame didn't offer protection. If anything, it painted a bigger target on their backs. Rappers became symbols in a culture war, their words dissected in courtrooms and city council meetings. The city's newspapers ran editorials about the menace of hip-hop, while talk radio hosts demanded the police get tougher, faster, louder. In this climate, every move was watched, every rumor amplified. The line between music and real life blurred, and the stakes for artists, fans, and police kept rising. The city's tension wasn't just about crime. It was about who got to control the story and who would pay the price when the next headline broke. By 1992, Snoop Doggy Dogg's name was echoing far beyond Long Beach. His first real break came when Dr. Dre, fresh out of NWA and already a legend, called him into the studio. Snoop's voice, smooth, cold, and laid back, cut through the static on Dre's solo debut, The Chronic. That album would sell over 3 million copies in its first year, but it wasn't just numbers. Snoop's verses on tracks like Nothing But a G Thang turned him into hip-hop's newest star, a young man with Crip ties who rapped about street survival with a calm that felt both chilling and magnetic. With that spotlight came pressure. Snoop's debut album, Doggy Style, dropped in November 1993 and exploded out the gate. Number 1 on the Billboard 200, platinum in a week, 5 million sold within months. The sound was pure West Coast, G-funk synths, heavy bass, and stories from the neighborhood. But behind the platinum plaques, there was no escaping where he came from. Snoop was still Calvin Broadus from the East Side, a product of the Rollin' 20s Crips, and the streets remembered. Old beefs lingered, and new enemies watched his every move. Fame made him rich, but it didn't make him safe. Death Row Records, run by Suge Knight, built an empire on that edge, combining street credibility with ruthless business. Studio sessions ran late, security was tight, and everyone close to Snoop knew the risks. Rival crews, jealous hustlers, and even the police kept tabs on the rising star. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. Snoop's lyrics weren't just entertainment, they were warnings, confessions, sometimes even coded messages to the world he'd barely escaped. As the crowds grew and the money multiplied, Snoop's circle tightened. McKinley Lee, known as Malik, became his bodyguard. Not a gang member, but a steady presence. Lee's job was simple: keep Snoop alive. In Los Angeles, that was never guaranteed. Every public appearance, every trip to the studio, every night out meant another chance for trouble. The line between rap fantasy and real-life danger blurred more with each headline. Snoop was riding the wave of stardom, but the undertow of street life was always there, just beneath the surface. August 25, 1993. Woodbine Park, tucked off the side streets in Palms, was the kind of spot where crews cooled off in the shade or settled beefs in broad daylight. Snoop rolled up that afternoon behind the wheel of a Jeep Cherokee. Riding with him, McKinley Lee in the passenger seat, Sean Abrams in the back. Across the park, Philip Woldemariam and his friends, By Yourself hustlers, were already posted up. The air was thick with old grudges and new threats. Days earlier, word had spread that Woldemariam flashed a gun at Snoop during a music video shoot. Nobody forgot. Not Snoop, not Lee. It started with words. Sean Abrams stepped out first, tension already crackling as he traded insults with Philip and his crew. Voices rose. Warnings, curses, a challenge thrown back and forth. Lee watched from the Jeep, eyes scanning for any sudden move. Snoop stayed behind the wheel, hands tight, mind replaying every threat he'd heard that week. The park felt smaller with every second. Woldemariam's group edged back toward their car, but nobody turned their back. Snoop and Lee pulled the Jeep up closer, closing the gap but not stepping out. The two groups stared each other down, separated by nothing but a strip of grass and a few feet of summer heat. In that moment, the past and present collided, street rules, pride and paranoia all mixing together. No one here was just a bystander. Every man in the park understood what could happen if someone reached the wrong way. Nobody remembers who flinched first. Some witnesses said Woldemariam's hand dropped to his waistband. Others swore Snoop's Jeep lurched forward, engine revving. Lee's eyes locked on the movement. Tension snapped into panic. In the chaos, the line between defense and offense blurred. For a heartbeat, time stalled. Then everything exploded. But the shot itself, the moment that would put Snoop's life on trial, hadn't happened yet. The fuse had been lit, and there was no turning back. 1 second, the park was all noise and threats. The next, the world shrank to the inside of a Jeep and the pressure of a trigger. McKinley Lee sat in the passenger seat, eyes trained on Philip Woldemariam's hands. Witnesses would later argue about what they saw. Some said Woldemariam turned away. Others swore he reached for his waistband. But in that instant, Lee made his choice. He raised a .380 pistol and fired a single shot through the open window. The crack of the gun cut through the shouting. Woldemariam staggered, then dropped to the ground, face down on the hot concrete. Blood pooled fast, soaking into the dust near the curb. The arguing stopped. Snoop slammed his foot on the gas and the Jeep tore away from the scene. In those first moments, nobody moved to help. Woldemariam's friends rushed to his side, but there was nothing to do. The bullet had torn laterally through his body, entering near his back and passing through muscle and bone. He was gone before paramedics arrived. Police sirens wailed in the distance, but the damage was done. Shell casings glinted in the sun, but the gun Woldemariam was said to have reached for was gone, lifted by his friends before officers even taped off the scene. The park, once loud with threats and bravado, now held only the low hum of shock. Officers from the LAPD's Pacific Division arrived within minutes, setting up a perimeter and collecting what evidence they could. but the street had already swallowed the truth. The single shot, fired from Lee's hand, would echo far beyond Woodbine Park. It was over in less than a heartbeat, but it set off a chain reaction. One body on the ground, one superstar on the run, and a city ready to put both on trial. Snoop Dogg didn't run. He didn't hide out in some mansion or try to vanish into the night. The day after the shooting at Woodbine Park, he walked into the LAPD's Pacific Division station with his lawyer at his side. It was August 26, 1993. The precinct was already buzzing. Reporters circling outside, police radios crackling with chatter about the city's most famous new suspect. Inside, Snoop's hands were cuffed, his jewelry taken, his pockets emptied for booking. The officer on duty logged his name, Calvin Cortazar Broadus Jr., age 21, height, weight, fingerprints, and a mugshot, one that would soon be splashed across every TV screen in America. McKinley Lee, the bodyguard, turned himself in too. For both men, the process was quick but heavy. The bail was set at $1 million, a number that made headlines on its own. Death Row Records wired the money, and by the next day, Snoop was back on the streets, but now trailed by cameras and a cloud of suspicion. The LAPD's paperwork stacked up. Incident reports, property receipts, evidence logs. The .380 pistol was tagged and locked in the evidence room. Shell casings, blood samples, and clothing from the scene were all cataloged, each item stamped with a case number that would follow Snoop for years. Through the glass of the booking window, Snoop looked more like a kid than a kingpin. The weight of the charge, murder, hung in the air. He wasn't just another name in the system. He was the face of West Coast rap, the voice of a generation now staring down the full force of Los Angeles law enforcement. The city's biggest news star was now its most wanted headline. Overnight, the story went national. News vans lined the block outside Pacific Station, each crew waiting for a glimpse of the man at the center of the storm. The arrest didn't just launch a legal case. It set off a media frenzy that would follow Snoop from the police station to the courthouse and into hip-hop history. Headlines hit like gunshots. Rapper charged with murder, splashed across the Los Angeles Times. Tabloids ran with every rumor, linking Snoop's lyrics to violence and painting his face next to crime scene tape. Night after night, TV anchors dissected the story, some calling him a menace, others a symbol of hip-hop's so-called moral crisis. MTV News ran updates between music videos. Radio DJs debated guilt and innocence on air. Even the Associated Press picked up the story, turning a local killing into a national flashpoint. The 1994 MTV Video Music Awards became a spectacle. Snoop took the stage with a murder charge hanging over his head, performing Murder Was the Case while the world watched for any sign of remorse or confession. Cameras zoomed in on his every move. The crowd buzzed with a mix of awe and suspicion. Backstage, Death Row Records braced for fallout. Suge Knight issued orders to keep Snoop out of trouble and spun the case as proof that the system wanted to take down Black's success. PR teams drafted statements, warning staff to stick to the script. Snoop's innocent. It's all a setup. Memo after memo circled the label's offices, spelling out the risks. If Snoop went down, so did Death Row's golden era. The pressure was relentless. Reporters trailed Snoop from courthouse to studio, snapping photos and shouting questions about gang ties and street justice. Editorials accused Death Row of glorifying violence, while fans lined up outside courtrooms to show support. Every newscast, every magazine cover, every talk radio segment added fuel. The trial hadn't even started, but the narrative was already being written. Jurors would walk in with headlines ringing in their ears. For Snoop, every day felt like he was on trial in the court of public opinion, long before he ever saw the inside of a courtroom. The state of California wasted no time making its intentions clear. Prosecutors Edward Nisson and Robert Grace strode into the courtroom armed with a charge sheet that read like a warning. First-degree murder, second-degree murder, voluntary manslaughter, conspiracy, and accessory after the fact. Every possible angle covered, every option on the table. The official language was cold and absolute. Calvin Broadus and McKinley Lee, accused of pursuing and killing Philip Woldemariam in what the state called a deliberate act of violence. The prosecution's theory was simple but damning. Snoop and his bodyguard didn't just defend themselves. They hunted a man down and ended his life in cold blood. The state's case was built on numbers as much as narrative. 24 witnesses lined up, ready to testify. Detectives, forensic analysts, civilian bystanders, and members of Woldemariam's own crew all listed in the prosecution's playbook. Each name represented another piece of the puzzle, another voice telling the jury what they saw, what they heard, or what they believed happened that afternoon in Woodbine Park. The prosecution promised to reconstruct the entire chain of events. Every word exchanged, every movement, every shot fired. Key among the state's evidence were the statements from Jason London and Dushan Joseph, both close associates of Philip Woldemariam. Their initial police interviews painted a picture of an unarmed victim, gunned down as he tried to get away. Both men claimed Woldemariam was retreating, not attacking, when the fatal shot rang out. The prosecution leaned hard on these accounts, arguing that the bullet's path, entering through the back and traveling laterally, proved Woldemariam was running for his life, not reaching for a weapon. If the jury believed this, self-defense would collapse. Forensics became the prosecution's anchor. The state's experts described the bullet's trajectory, the wound in Woldemariam's back, and the angle of fire. Autopsy photos and diagrams were prepared to show the jury exactly where the bullet entered, where it exited, and how it moved through muscle and bone. The prosecution argued these details proved intent, not panic. According to their narrative, Snoop and Lee didn't just react. They pursued, cornered, and executed. Detectives from the LAPD's Pacific Division took the stand to walk the jury through the physical evidence. The .380 pistol recovered, the shell casings logged, the blood samples and clothing sealed in evidence bags. Each item was tagged, photographed, and entered into the record. Crime scene sketches, police reports, and booking logs were presented to show a seamless investigation, an airtight chain of custody. The prosecution's message was clear. Every step had been accounted for, every fact nailed down. The state's legal team spoke with authority, painting Snoop Dogg not as a celebrity caught in the wrong place, but as a man who used his fame as cover for street justice. They called out the defense's anticipated self-defense claim as a smokescreen, insisting that the only threat present was the one inside the Jeep. The prosecution's closing promise: the jury would hear from every witness, see every shred of evidence, and understand exactly how and why Philip Woldemariam died that day. Behind the formal language and courtroom procedure, the prosecution's real weapon was pressure. 24 witnesses, a stack of forensic reports, and the full weight of the state of California, all aimed at one man and his bodyguard. The message was unmistakable. No matter how famous, no matter how rich, nobody stands above the law. For Snoop Dogg, the fight for his life was just beginning. David Kenner sat at the defense table, eyes locked on the witness stand, voice low but sharp. The prosecution's wall of certainty started to crack the moment Jason London took the oath. London, friend of Philip Woldemariam and member of the By Yourself Hustlers, had already told police that Philip was unarmed. But under cross-examination, the story changed. Kenner pressed him, question after question, until the truth slipped out. London and Dushan Joseph had pulled a gun from Woldemariam's waistband as he lay dying in the carport. They hid it, first to avoid the police finding a stolen weapon, then to tip the scales against Snoop and Lee. Joseph called next, tried to stick to his script, but the defense didn't let up. Joseph admitted he lied to protect himself and help the prosecution. He said he'd wanted the jury to believe Woldemariam was defenseless, even though he knew otherwise. The courtroom air felt heavy. Jurors scribbled notes. Prosecutors shifted in their seats. Kenner circled back to the details. He had Joseph walk through the moment after the shot. How he and London grabbed the gun, how they ditched it, how they agreed to keep it quiet. Joseph's words tangled, then tripped. He couldn't say for sure if Woldemariam reached for the gun first or if both men moved at the same time. His certainty dissolved into confusion. The defense let that silence hang. In those gaps, doubt took root. The next blow landed on the evidence table. Kenner asked about the shell casing from Lee's .380 pistol. The LAPD had logged it, then lost it. The casing was gone, never entered into evidence. Bloodied clothes from the scene, too, had disappeared. The defense suggested some items were destroyed by prosecutors, others simply vanished. The chain of custody, so critical in any murder trial, now looked more like a broken thread. The jury never saw the bullets match, never handled the casing that could have sealed the story one way or the other. The prosecution's case, built on forensics and physical evidence, suddenly felt incomplete. Kenner didn't need to call a parade of witnesses. He let the prosecution's own case unravel. Each cross-examination exposed another weak link. A memory that changed, a piece of evidence that couldn't be found, a police report that didn't match the testimony. The state's story, so clear at the start, now shifted with every answer. The defense hammered self-defense. Lee fired because he believed Woldemariam was about to shoot. The missing gun, the lost casing, the destroyed clothes, all of it fed the same question. Could anyone be sure what happened in those frantic seconds at Woodbine Park? By the time the defense rested, the jury had seen more contradictions than clarity. The prosecution's case, once airtight, now leaked uncertainty. In the back of the courtroom, Snoop sat silent, face unreadable. Every word, every missing scrap of evidence pushed the jury closer to one thing: doubt. And in a murder trial, doubt is everything. February 20th, 1996. The jury files back into Department 109. Faces blank, but eyes darting. Snoop Dogg sits at the defense table, hands folded, barely breathing. McKinley Lee stares down at the floor, jaw clenched. 6 days of deliberation have passed. The city outside buzzing with rumors, MTV trucks, and crowds pressed against courthouse barricades. The judge calls for order. Reporters grip their notepads. Snoop's mother, Beverly, clutches her rosary. The jury four-person stands, voice steady. On the count of murder, not guilty. On the count of voluntary manslaughter, not guilty. On the count of accessory, not guilty. The last charge, manslaughter, hangs in the air. The jury can't agree. Mistrial. For a moment, the room is silent. Then the sound breaks loose. Snoop's family bursts into tears. Defense lawyers exhale, and in the back, a ripple of applause rises before the judge bangs his gavel for quiet. Outside, fans erupt, chanting his name. Inside, Snoop doesn't jump up or shout. He just closes his eyes, shoulders dropping, the weight of 2.5 years falling off in a single breath. The ankle monitor, the daily check-ins, the threat of life behind bars, all gone in an instant. Lee's mother sobs, clutching her son. David Kenner grins, shaking hands with Marcia Morrissey. The prosecution sits stone-faced, shuffling papers, already thinking about appeals. Snoop stands, finally, and hugs his mother. He whispers something only she can hear. The judge dismisses the jury, thanking them for their service in a trial that's gripped the city and the country. Reporters sprint for the payphones. Cameras flash as Snoop steps into the hallway, flanked by his team. He doesn't smile for the press. Later, he'll say he spent every night of the trial wondering if he'd ever see his son again. But right now, he's free. The courtroom doors swing open, and the world outside rushes in, hungry for a glimpse of the man who just beat the case of his life. The verdict didn't end the story. Outside the courthouse, Snoop's freedom meant headlines, interviews, and a second chance at a life that almost vanished. But for Philip Woldemariam's family, the pain didn't fade. Within months, they filed a wrongful death lawsuit, asking for $25 million and arguing that the criminal trial hadn't brought real justice. The legal teams met behind closed doors, weighing the cost of dragging the case back into the spotlight. By August 1996, both sides agreed to a confidential settlement. The terms were never made public. No apology was issued, no admission of wrongdoing, just a quiet agreement that closed the books on the civil fight, even if questions lingered in the court of public opinion. Snoop's career, once balanced on a knife edge, surged forward. He released new music, booked tours, and appeared on TV, but the shadow of the trial followed him. Murder Was the Case became both a hit single and a warning, proof that the line between art and reality could turn deadly. In interviews, Snoop spoke about moving on, focusing on family, and leaving street drama behind. His image shifted, less gangsta, more survivor. The world watched as he transformed from defendant to icon, his story woven into hip-hop's DNA. But inside the industry, the debate never stopped. Some said he'd escaped a system stacked against black men. Others whispered about luck, legal maneuvering, and the evidence that vanished before the jury could ever see it. Nearly 3 decades later, the case found its way back to court. This time, not for a new trial, but for closure. In February 2024, a Los Angeles judge granted a motion to seal the records of Snoop Dogg's murder charge. The petition, backed by his legal team and advocates from Unite the People, argued that the old files cast a shadow over his life and legacy. Arrest affidavits, witness statements, and trial exhibits disappeared from public view, locked away by court order. The official reason? To prevent outdated accusations from shaping the future. The details of what was sealed remained secret, fueling new rounds of debate about privacy, justice, and what the world deserves to know. Snoop Dogg's story now stands at the intersection of fame, violence, and survival. The records are sealed, the settlement paid, but the questions about justice, about truth, about how close he came to losing everything, still echo through hip-hop and beyond. On February 20th, 1996, after months of testimony and 24 prosecution witnesses, the jury found Snoop Dogg and McKinley Lee not guilty of murder. Court records confirmed that a lost shell casing, disputed witness statements, and the late disclosure of a concealed weapon all raised reasonable doubt. Yet many details, like the precise movements in Woodbine Park and the full police investigative file, remain sealed, with Los Angeles County Superior Court ordering all criminal records closed as of February 2024. The confidential civil settlement with Philip Woldemariam's family also keeps some questions unanswered. What is clear, Snoop Dogg's acquittal changed the trajectory of his life and helped redefine the boundaries between hip-hop, celebrity, and the justice system. 3 decades later, the case is sealed, but the legend of Snoop Dogg's survival still echoes through hip-hop history.